This week, over 1,000 people gathered outside the Treasury in D.C. to protest Elon Musk's takeover of the federal government.
And I don't know about you, but I don't think the United States Senate should vote for a single nominee that's going to participate in this fraud.
Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut was one of about a dozen lawmakers present.
When we open up the Senate every single morning, we don't pledge allegiance to the billionaires. We don't pledge allegiance to Elon Musk. We don't pledge allegiance to the creepy 22-year-olds working for Elon Musk.
When you're going and talking to your Democratic senator, you say, hey, imagine you are Mitch McConnell in the minority, and then do what that would do. That's what you're going to do.
Ezra Levin is the co-founder and co-executive director of the nonprofit Indivisible.
Are we going to unify this Democratic opposition? Are we going to stop what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing to our country? Is Trump a king? Oh, that's news to me.
Indivisible was one of the groups behind that rally and many others happening across the country this week. Levin says political change happens in 3 distinct stages.
There's an old saying, and it's kind of adapted from this, is first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. When it comes to pushing Democratic members of Congress to actually fight back, what I've seen is first they do ignore you. They say, we're the adults in the room, we'll figure this out. They don't take action. The next step is public relations BS. Actions that look good to the casual observer, but it doesn't actually involve doing anything somewhat uncomfortable, somewhat new, pushing the boundaries of what they're used to.
Last week, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer told the Democratic governors that he couldn't force every senator in his party to oppose every Trump nominee, that his strategy would be to focus on key appointments. But this week, he urged Democrats to vote against all of President Trump's nominees, a notable about-face, although he also engaged in some empty PR.
On Tuesday, in the hours leading up to our rally, Leader Schumer and Leader Jeffries held a joint press conference in which they introduced a bill.
We are going to do everything we can to sound the alarm and fight with everything we've got to stop this horrible, horrible act by this Doge group. We call our legislation Stop the Steal.
Here's the thing about the Stop the Steal bill. Nobody with even a passing understanding or familiarity with how Congress works believes this bill is ever going to get a vote. Nobody believes if this bill got a vote that it would pass. Nobody believes that if it passed that Donald Trump would sign it. Nobody believes that if he vetoed it that Congress would override it. And nobody believes if Congress even succeeded in overriding it that Trump would agree to implement it. What this bill does is say, I'm Chuck Schumer, I'm Hakeem Jeffries, I care. I don't care that you care. I care that you're using the power available to you.
You launched Indivisible with your spouse, Leah Greenberg, in 2016, spurred in part by the actions of the new president, Donald Trump. But you say that you were equally driven by the Democrats' reaction to the win?
There was vividly remember this, a interview with a future Trump appointee sometime in November of 2016 in which he was talking positively about the Japanese internment camps during World War II as an example for what they might do with Muslims, immigrants, and refugees. Obviously, we were shocked by that. But then the next day in the New York Times, we read an interview with incoming Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. And his interview was just as shocking. He said, well, we lost elections. I guess we're going to have to find ways to make deals with Trump. And I think we can work on infrastructure together. And so there was this point where it looked like America's future would be one where the roads to its new internment camps were well paved with bipartisan dollars. That's what led us to write the Indivisible Guide. Part of it, yes, was focusing on just how unpopular and unjust the Trump agenda was. But half of it was focusing on how we can help Democrats find their spines to actually be the opposition party and fight back.
And as Musk mounted his takeover of the federal government, you recalled a memo circulated by the GOP, the minority party, back in 2009. And it was a detailed plan to use whatever tools they had as the minority party to block the passing of the Affordable Care Act. Now, obviously, they didn't have the numbers to ultimately defeat it, but they really gave it the college try. What did the memo say?
This memo detailed the procedural tools the minority has to slow down everything as much as possible so that the majority has fewer legislative days to use up. And maybe, just maybe, we can build up enough pressure to stop some of what they want to get done. The memo does not say there's a magic button to somehow win everything. What it says is there are procedural tools that the minority can use. It's things like the Senate depends on having a quorum. When you see a speech on the Senate floor, you might get a sense that that senator is talking to this full body of people. Nobody is in that chamber. But you know what the minority can do to be a real pain in the butt? They can say, hey, there's not a quorum here. You got to go get a quorum. And then all of those senators have to waltz over to the Senate chamber and be counted.
Talk about some of the other ways Democrats on the Hill can throw sand in the gas tank.
So, unanimous consent. It's a feature of the Senate that says, we are going to call for a unanimous agreement of every single one of the 100 senators. And if everybody's okay, we're going to move forward. If any senator declines to give that unanimous consent, then if the Senate wants to move forward on that, it's a huge pain in the butt.
Does it work that way for confirming nominees?
Nominees only require 50 votes. There are 53 Republican senators. The vice president can break a tie. That means if they muster 50 votes for a nominee, the vice president can come in and break the tie, and then that nominee gets confirmed. That's exactly what happened, for instance, for Defense Secretary Hegseth. But everything around that nomination, whether we're going into a session to consider votes at all, whether we are going to move forward and consider legislation in the future, whether we're going to consider amendments, all of those things do require unanimous consent.
Mm-hmm. You suggest, having worked on the Hill, that there's a different mindset for many people in the Democratic Party right now. A sense that, handshake deals are how to get the job done, that being collegial is part of the culture of the Senate and was, but is no longer, and somehow they're still living in the Reagan-era world.
As a congressional House staffer, what I saw was some assumption on the Democratic side of the aisle that the Republicans were bargaining in good faith, that they weren't simply trying to obstruct. And now that we are in the minority, what I often see from Senate Democrats is some assumption that at some point Senate Republicans will listen to their better angels, that their buddies on the other side of the aisle will come to their senses and call into question what Trump or what Elon Musk are doing. I think there's a really unhealthy mentality that is fed into the culture of the Senate, and it looks something like this. We have to demonstrate that we're reasonable, that we're willing to cut deals. And on one level, that's admirable, right? But the impact of that is to give cover to the very people who are trying to undermine our democracy. Take, for example, all of the Democratic votes for Rubio to be Secretary of State. It is Rubio who is overseeing the unconstitutional dismantling of USAID. What did Democrats get out of voting for Rubio to become Secretary of State? Did it win any voters over to our side? No. What it did was provide bipartisan cover to a Trump lackey who is currently engaged in heinous behavior and is empowered in part by the Democrats to do it. The thing that frustrates me most of all is when I see senators give speeches saying a coup is ongoing or we're living through a constitutional crisis. I agree with them. Why do their actions then not match up with what they're saying? 22 Senate Democrats voted for the Secretary of Veteran Affairs that Trump nominated. This guy, Doug Collins, he's a MAGA Republican, and 22 Democrats voted for him. So if you've got a Democratic senator, why aren't they doing what Brian Schatz is doing? Why aren't they doing what Lisa Blunt Rochester is doing? Why aren't they doing what Chris Murphy is doing?
And Indivisible has a playbook for regular citizens that offers specific ways they can act on the state, the local, and the national level to pressure their representatives. You wrote in that playbook that they need to remember Democrats are a skittish bunch, and there's nothing like losing an election to plunge them into an extended depression that somehow ends with everybody forming reading groups to discuss hillbilly elegy. Your job is to interrupt this cycle as quickly as possible and push them back into fighting form.
I would love to take credit for that line. I co-wrote that with my spouse and co-executive director Leah Greenberg. I believe Leah wrote that line, and I approve. So that how comes down to something we've talked about already, which is this idea of constituent power, this idea of what makes our democratic republic run. And it is built on people power. It might not seem like that at times. It might seem so complex or big that us individually can't actually affect anything. But let me tell you, I'm getting frantic calls from senators, representatives, and their staff saying, why are we getting so much incoming from our constituents now? Make it stop, please. What do you want us to do? I just saw Lisa Murkowski, the senator of Alaska, say the call volume right now incoming to her office is 40 times what it was. 40 times. They are feeling it. And I know it can feel impossible to move the United States Congress. How can anybody do that? And the answer is no individual person can do that. But we together, organizing locally, focused on our own elected officials, you're damn right we can do it. And the reason why I know we can is because we already have.
Thank you so much.
Brooke, it's great talking to you. Let's talk again soon.
Ezra Levin is the co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible, a nonprofit that is working to elect progressive leaders and promote democracy.